Welcome, everyone. This podcast is called Old Labour, New Labour to Blue Labour. And our guest is Bob Thomson. It was suggested to us that he might come on the podcast specifically to talk about the Scottish Left Review magazine, which is having its 25th anniversary in a month or so. And over those 25 years, the Labour Party has definitely shifted its ground and maybe shifted its colour as well. So he's quite a guy, isn't he?
When you listen to him, he's quite unassuming, quite softly spoken. But as he was talking to us, he kept dropping in, oh, when I was this, when I was that. I mean, my God, this man's got an amazing CV. Yeah. He's a Lanarkshire lad, started off as a fitter and a draftsman in a factory, rose up through the union, became the National Youth Secretary. At one point, he was, I think, the Scottish Secretary of Unison. He also was involved with Labour for Indy in 2014, and we're going to play you a clip about that we found in a minute. He was also at one point the treasurer of Scottish Labour. He was the secretary of Scottish Labour. He was a member of the Constitutional Convention. He's a member of the Electoral Reform Society. He's one of the group that set up the Scottish Left Review and also the Jimmy Reid Foundation. So what a pedigree.
As you say, what a pedigree. And I mean, interesting to us as well, because as it happened, it's only recently that we did that podcast with Esther Robertson about the Constitutional Convention. I'd seen a picture of Bob as he is now, and I thought, oh, that seems to me to be the same guy that I took a little clip of on. Now, this was the Saturday before the 2014 election. I was in Buchanan Street, and up at the top of Buchanan Street on the steps, the whole place was buzzing, absolutely buzzing, you know. Also lots of conversations happening between people who weren't, you know, pro-Indy and people who were. It was great. And at one point I was standing behind the stall that said Labour for Independence, and as it turns out, it was Bob that was sitting there. All these conversations happening, and the occasional band would start up, or a piper would start up, and yeah, it was good. Anyway,
the reason he agreed to come on was because it's the 25th anniversary of the Scottish Left Review. So we will put links in the notes as to how you can have a look at it. It's an online magazine as well as a printed one. And the one thing that struck us both when we had a look was how interesting their front covers were. They cover a wide range of topics of interest. It's not just all sleeves rolled up, let's talk Labour. It's not party political for one thing, it's just Left Review.
The Scottish Left Review as a publication is not party political. When you and I started just going on the website and having a look, there's quite a few people there going, oh, we've interviewed them, and Colin Fox is there, and Bill Ramsey, and a few other people. It's left wing, obviously, but it's non-party political. And during the Scottish referendum campaign, the Scottish Left Review didn't take a stance either way.
We'll get into all that when we speak to Bob. So we're going to pick up the story with him when he was chatting to one of his neighbours, and they got together around his neighbour's flat and decided to set up the Scottish Left Review, and that neighbour was Jimmy Reid. Welcome, Bob, into the studio. Delighted to have you on the show. Tell us a bit about the Scottish Left Review.
Someone who I'd known for a long time, and then turned out living round the corner from me in the tenement round the corner was Jimmy Reid. And at that time, Jimmy had a very well-known column in the Herald, the Glasgow Herald. We had all been, if you like, revived and rejuvenated with Labour getting back into power after the 19 years of Thatcherism and all that. And then we had Blair. But Jimmy, like the rest of us, was getting very concerned about New Labour and the line they were taking. And in 2000, he got a group of us together. We just in his tenement flat, and it was quite an eclectic group of people, quite impressive. There, Jimmy himself, there was Campbell Christie, who was the General Secretary of the STUC, Isabel Winwood, Zaya Stalwart, Rosanna Cunningham, MSP. There was John McCallion, Alex Smith, and Harry McCubbin, MEPs, a whole range of people who were added to later on. And we thought that a publication which was non-party, was important, non-party, sort of a forum for political engagement. Next month, September, will be our 25th year of publication, and we're having a range of activities regarding that, and trying to again consolidate our position, because as anybody who knows about these things, that a left magazine managing to survive for 25 years is quite an accomplishment with all the pressures that happens. But we think we have actually done well. I mean, I think learning from history is important there. So if anybody goes on to our website, just type in Scottish Left Review, you'll see the range of articles over those 25 years. And some of the issues there that I think are recent ones which have been important and as current as things like sustainable employment and just transition. For example, on the Clyde, with building the warships, okay, Jimmy Reid was central to saving the shipyards, but basically speaking, the shipyards are warships. That's where a just transition came in. You can understand people who are working in these places saying, well, we want to keep our jobs. But the answer there is we could be doing something much more productive in building warships. So it's an area that we have emphasised on, is things like climate change, just transition, employment stability, the transfer of employment law to Scotland. And this is one of the things which was talked about, Gordon Brown and all that, and he's on the eve of the independence referendum, making all these comments. One of these were the things that was there, and these are some of the things that we have argued about. And after Jimmy Reid died in 2010, we set up the Jimmy Reid Foundation, which is a think tank, and the magazine, obviously, Scottish Left Review, publishes a lot of that. Something which is very dear to me was we produced an extensive report on Stop Trident, which exposed the lies about all the jobs that were supposed to be created by Trident and all that there. We've done Fair Work in Scotland, a recent one on land reform. Students of Scottish history will know that land reform has been central to a lot of radical situations that we have. We've tried to keep current. Margaret Chapman of the Greens is our vice chairperson just now. Stephen Smiley, a leading lay activist in Unison, is the chair. So we have people who are actually, if you like, who are at the coal face and doing things there. So the magazine is still vibrant. Well, we do want to do the print publication, but obviously the majority of our readers are now online. Type in your Scottish Left Review and have a look, and if you think it's worthwhile, perhaps you could maybe think about subscribe. You can subscribe to the print edition or to the online.
Yeah. I had a wee look on the website. I hadn't been on your website before, but we were thinking ahead about what we might chat to you about. And I must say, it's really impressive. I read an article Maggie Chapman had written, I think that was fairly recently, and then come across one that Colin Fox had written. He's been on the podcast, quite a few times, and he's a very good speaker, but actually he's also a very good writer. It struck me there was quite a vibrancy to the content, and maybe that does come about because you're not party political. You're left wing, but you're not party political. You're not, and I don't think you take a stance on the constitutional side of the Scottish debate either.
Individually, but not as an organisation. Colin is a long-time subscriber and writer to the magazine, but he was also on the editorial committee for a long time. He's also a Motherwell man, and me being a Wisher man,
As a podcast as well, we're not party political. We support independence, but we're not specific parties, which is quite good because it means we've been invited along to SSP events, Greens events. You can look a bit wider if you're not fixed.
I think that's important. We have to be open, and the issues there that's been central most of my political life about the constitutional situation. A couple of things. One, having been a trade union official, a trade union official's job is often one of compromises. And my view would be is that you've got people on each side of the debate on the Constitution and not being prepared to compromise. And that's why, we are where we are. And sometimes that puts people in the middle a bit off. So you can be a 100% fervent advocate for independence, but sometimes, compromise gets you half the road there, and then you've only got to argue to go the other half. That has guided my view on constitutional issues. For example, I'm a young trade unionist, and I had an uncle who was a great ILP, or Independent Labour Party, which was very, much there for independence and all that. So I've always had a perspective, on that. And as Scottish Secretary of what was then the biggest union in Scotland, I was well aware that, people in Scotland say about the getting ruled from London. Well, as the Scottish Secretary of the Union, we were getting ruled from London as well. So we saw the need, not just for devolution government, but we needed devolution in the trade unions themselves. Yeah. People got a bit fed up at times with me from London and when I battled on about these things. But, for example, I had to say to them when they put out a circular and about the wage rates or new agreements in local government or the health service, I had to point out to them, even way back in the 70s, the 80s, 90s, that local government was devolved in Scotland. We had the Local Government Act and all that, and the same with the National Health Service. So I had practical experience of these things, arguing, and that's how I think I've always been, if you like, very much involved in the idea of what I would call Devo Max.
It was interesting hearing what you said about how the Scottish Left Review got going. Like Jimmy Reid sort of getting you all together in his flat, and God, he wouldn't have minded being a fly on the wall for that conversation. But also just like the context. So 2000, that would have been 3 years into having a Labour government back at Westminster. Yeah. We got the Labour government back. That was when I still voted Labour. And you think, oh, great, fantastic, huge majority. And then I hear Gordon Brown. The first time I voted for Gordon Brown was way back in the 70s when he stood as student rector at Edinburgh University. And Gordon Brown says, oh, I'm going to keep the Conservative spending plans. And you sort of go, what? Why? So that's interesting because I could understand, well, Jimmy Reid, but some of the others as well, going, look, that's not maybe what we thought we were voting for. It wasn't what I thought I was voting for. But it's a little bit similar now, isn't it? It's not quite 3 years since, it's only a year since Labour got back in. And again, folk who voted Labour a lot are going, that's not what I voted for. It's just interesting how you get a repeat of a pattern, isn't it?
Well, I think, this is a thing about, when I was thinking about these 25 years, the circumstances are similar. We had Blair coming in with all that people after, remember, 19 years of Tory, this show and it wasn't a show, and we were all ecstatic and looking for things to be done. Then, for my sins, I had a lot of dealings, because at that time I was Scottish Treasurer of the Labour Party, and I had a lot of dealings with Blair. And I hadn't much opinion of him in the first instance, but I had with Gordon Brown, and I found really a bigger disappointment because Gordon Brown's whole background was a Labour background and everything else, Sonny the Man's. One of the great disappointments was when he stood up at the Chancellor's Mansion House speech and said it was the end, the boom and bust. 8 years later, we had the biggest bank bust in history. If you remember the 2008 bank collapse, which led to austerity and another, 14 years of Tories. So that was quite disappointing. And also, one of the things that people sometimes forget about Blair, because he was sweeted. If you remember, when it came to the referendum, besides the fact that we had all agreed under the Scottish Constitutional Convention, which I might go on to back to, that we were going to have a single question about do you want a parliament? And then Blair insisted in putting in this, which was a second question about should we have the parliament have tax raising powers. Now he did that to hobble the parliament. That was the deliberate intention. And they came up with it. It was a London, nothing to do with the Scottish Constitutional Convention. Now I was the leading person resisting that. And I can tell you here now, I don't mind a frontline debate, but there was, really underhand dealings, putting out distorted stories, everything else, all these things. And it really showed to me how really dirty fighting they could be. But
they've not changed, have they?
No. But Blair came up with that. That was never agreed. And Blair expected a no vote on the tax raising ones, and he got beat on that one there. And it was that background that I think why Jimmy tried to, get it off the ground. And when we set up the magazine.
Yeah. So the magazine was set up 2000. That was, the Parliament was just getting going. When it did start to find its feet, did you find yourself thinking, this is what we wanted, and this is what we thought would come from the Constitutional Convention? Did it satisfy your kind of leaning in the way that the New Labour hadn't?
If you actually look at it there, one of the things we did have, you mentioned Colin Fox, was that we actually did have a more vibrant Parliament. I mean, there was 5 MSPs from the Scottish Socialist Party, but we also had independents with Margot MacDonald and Dennis Canavan and all that. And interestingly enough, if you look at some of the radical decisions like free tuition and prescription charges, the Liberals were pushing New Labour on those. So, the Liberals actually at that time were a bit sometimes more radical than the New Labour.
You mentioned a minute there about the issues you'd had with Unison and being run by London. What do you think about the fact that we've got a Holyrood election coming up, and yet 3 or maybe 4 of the main contender parties are not Scottish registered parties, they're UK registered? That means they've got access to funding and shipping up big characters to come and campaign here for an election that really is nothing to do with Westminster MPs. We keep asking the question, whether it's the SNP, SSP, Scottish Greens, are all registered in Scotland and are only being funded from within Scotland.
There's nothing to stop somebody out with Scotland funding the SNP or the Greens, etc. Now, so happens, I've been a lifelong member of the Electoral Reform Society and in favour of PR and that. And in fact, I was the person as vice chairman of the Scottish Labour Party who got the Scottish Labour Party to agree to the proportional representative votes in the Scottish Parliament. So I think we just saw something there where that guy Elon Musk that was offering to give £30 million to reform and all that. Now the simple answer to that is you ban it. In my view, there should probably be a maximum of £5,000, something like that. Because we see it's obscene in America. You're talking about billions of dollars there on this.
the other thing with Reform, and I was just reading the other day, 90% of their funding comes from the fossil fuel industry. So they're essentially just the political wing of the fossil fuel industry. They're coming in here, funded by wherever it is in the world, and potentially buying seats in a Scottish election.
I think there's also an element of the munitions failure on that war game. But I mean, the answer there is, right now, at Westminster, last May, Labour got a third of the vote and got 2/3 of the seats, and effectively, Labour only 20% won. A fifth of people in Britain voted, yet they've got a massive majority. Now that, all wrong. And interestingly, when they all demonise Jeremy Corbyn, Corbyn got more votes in 2019 than Starmer got last May. So
I might do again.
and so, it seems to me there that we really, and it's supposed to be Labour policy to do away with first past the post, but we're going to get nothing radical out. I mean, my view here is that Starmer is an establishment plan. Keir Starmer is called after Keir Hardie, who was the first Labour leader. Folk say that Keir Hardie will be spinning in his grave.
Yeah,
absolutely, yeah.
I've got a pal who's the secretary of the Keir Hardie Society, which I'm a member of, and he points out that, in fact, unusual for the time when he died in 1915, Keir was cremated, so he's not got any grave. I always say that Starmer's parents were historically confused. They should have called him Ramsay, not Keir.
yeah, exactly.
Ramsay MacDonald was the first Labour Prime Minister who went and died in a coalition with the Tories.
Just going back to that point about, funding of political parties, because I suppose you're right. It's like the basic thing to do is just ban it or put a limit on how much can be, donated by anyone. Of course, I mean, in the past, of course, Labour has benefited hugely from trade union donations. I think that from what I gather these days, that's not so significant for them. They seem to be getting plenty of money coming from the kind of donors that in the past we would have thought had given their money to the Tories. So yeah, I can see that. Put a limit on it, because you're right. Like in America, it's almost as, I mean, people are basically buying elections.
Yes.
And then having bought it, the money is not free. They want things that will benefit usually their companies afterwards, and Musk's a good example of that, but there's plenty of other ones. So I can see that, put a ban on it. And I mean, there is talk about stopping that happening for UK elections. And I read those reports and I go, well, fine. But actually, I'd like to stop it for Scottish elections as well. Anyone, anywhere could give money to the SNP or the Scottish Greens or, SSP, whatever. But at the same time, maybe if there's a limit on it, that kind of goes a long way to stopping things sliding towards the American model. But it wouldn't necessarily mean that Scottish elections and people standing for election in Scotland were funded by money raised in Scotland, which is it's a bit of a different angle, isn't it? There's the amount and then there's where it comes from.
But it's no constitutional conundrum. Electoral law rests with Westminster. So that's why you have that situation. The answer to that would be to completely devolve elections there, and then we could decide it. And there's some partial devolution of these, because you notice there that when Scotland and now Wales are taking the voting age to 16, and now, of course, Westminster's falling ahead. But, for example, the electoral Commission and all that is a UK body. So my view is here is that, as ever, I think, for example, Scotland would be more radical in these limits than perhaps England and Westminster. So if we had it devolved in Scotland, we could decide to say, you've got to be registered in Scotland and you've got to give your reports. If that was something that the Scottish Parliament decided. So it really comes back to those issues. And that really gets me to what my position is on the constitutional issue over most of my active lifetime. And you know, we saw this in the rules, the 40% rule, the Cunningham, wasn't it? That was a prime example of where the establishment get what they want, that they put that in. And we see this all the time, and how we've got to try and change things. Now, after the failure of the 79 referendum, I joined the campaign for a Scottish Assembly. Eventually became the campaign for a Scottish Parliament, and I was on the committee of that. There were quite a lot of interesting people. And that really there, if you like, was the genesis for the Scottish Constitutional Convention, which I was involved in there. And the Scottish Constitutional Convention, bringing not just the political parties, but civil Scotland together, the churches, the trade unions, local government and all that, you know, was very, to me, very important. It really showed that unanimity of views there and reasonableness that we had. So that was important there. And, you know, as I said, we saw how, despite the Scottish Constitutional Convention and the majority of views from that, how Blair tried to sabotage it with his tax question on the referendum. A sign there of the establishment always want to keep control. When we came to the 2014 referendum, I and others argued that there should have been a third option. You know, not just a yes or no, but there should have been a third option, which was, again, this Devo Max. If you like, a compromise there, because the reality here is that while it's such, you know, a close vote, a good lot of people were, if you like, fearful of taking that complete step. So if you like, the half step might have been more possible. Now, I know that's not everybody's point of view, but to me, my argument was that what we could have been arguing for, and then you could have went a step further another time, was super federalism. What actually the constitutional term is confederalism. I mean, for example, if you had, say, a council of the British Isles, that everything was devolved except defence, foreign policy and macroeconomics, but that any decisions on these had to be unanimous. England, with 90% of the vote, couldn't always outvote people. So, in other words, you had that. Now, that was just my view there, but as I said, being involved in quite heavily in the 2004 referendum, one of the things that we didn't go over that line was that there were some people still fearful about what was going to happen with the pound. And these were obviously scare tactics by the establishment. And if you remember, I think we had Barack Obama as president giving an opinion. Which, I mean, absolutely, you know, brass neck. Something like that. So we had that there. So to some extent, that really is my own personal position right now. And say we got a confederal British Isles in another, you know, generation, 10, 15 years, it may well be that people were comfortable with that, and then if they wanted to take the step, the complete independence, they could. But then you would take people with you.
I mean, that's interesting, because I suspect if there had been that Devo Max option on the ballot paper, that is probably what we would have voted for, because it was such a vibrant campaign. I wasn't very active in it, but I went to a few meetings, and I walked into a meeting that was organised by Women for Independence, and there must have been 500 or 600 people there. I mean, really good questions, fantastic load of speakers. Philippa Whitford was there, Jean Freeman was there, really good people. So it was a very vibrant campaign, wasn't it? So I suspect that a step too far, plus all the stuff that we got, well, the disinformation, let's say, and then George Osborne. I mean, to be fair to George Osborne, that was very slick the way he turned the tables on Alec Salmond about the pound. And I mean, and that was probably another thing that made it hard for people to just, as you say, go that extra step. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because if that had happened, personally, I would have been disappointed. But if that had happened, it would be a very different position that we're in these days. And it's interesting as well thinking about a confederal solution. I don't know if you might even have been at this meeting, but Fiona and I went over to the Scottish Spring Conference that the Scottish Electoral Society ran a few months back. So it was Mark Drakeford, the former Welsh, and he did this talk, which was such a good talk, and it was in the end what he was, his conclusion that he was putting forward was let's aim towards getting a confederal federalist set up for Great Britain.
I think we had enough debate about that. What you're saying, Marlene, there was a vibrancy, a buzz about the referendum, and the meetings you were getting. I mean, I remember speaking at one in the old STUC buildings, and it was Wayne C. Smith, who was a character and a half, who was chairing it. And that we actually had to have two meetings because the hall was that packed out. We spoke in the hall, and then people were in the adjacent building, and we then good to go and do the meeting again next door. But that was great, and as you said, there was that buzz there that we had. It was important to do it, and we've got to get it right. And as I say, I don't know. It just seems to me there that what we're talking about is people's, if you like, United Nations Charter, Convention of Human Rights says it's people's right to decide their form of government. That's a basic tenet, of democracy. And the way that Westminster's stopping that, it's undemocratic. It's as simple as that. I think we've got to, to be saying these things there just now. And we could go into things there because I don't think any of the political parties have covered themselves in glory on these issues. And one of the big dangers here is that, and I can understand it there just now, that we're seeing this, that people are more disillusioned and disgruntled with the political parties. And that's why we're seeing all these, different things happening there. As somebody who's been a member of the Labour Party for more than 60 years, I'm just really so disillusioned with this guy Starmer. I mean, he keeps on suspending people who are MPs who are supporting Labour Party policy. He should be suspended. I mean, he got elected, on giving 5 guarantees, and he's ratted in all of them. And I can understand why people are disillusioned. I went on to something about People's Assembly against austerity, and it was and Jeremy Corbyn was speaking at it. And Jeremy and I are old mates because him and I worked together, and we were both officials in UPI. So anyway, I go back a long time. It was at one of these Zoom meetings, and you know how you get them there. At the beginning there were a lot of people at them, but afterwards the numbers started to decline. Well, there was over 500 people at this meeting last week on the Zoom line there, and it's about. And I think the main thing was about this new party that they're talking about.
If you want more council housing, if you want an end to homelessness, if you want an end to child poverty, if you want an end to inequality, if you want the rich paying their proper fair share of taxation, and you want to end selling arms to regimes that bomb innocent people, it's your party.
Now, what do you think of that? Tell us what you think.
Interesting enough, I'm told there's now 600,000 people have emails saying showing an interest. And somebody told me this because I haven't seen it. We're looking for the figure. There's 60,000 of them in Scotland, which is quite remarkable. One of the things that's been silent, and one of the reasons I've been on to this Zoom meeting with the 500 was, this new party hasn't said anything about the other nations. She said nothing about Scotland or Wales, or for that matter, Northern Ireland. So it seems to me here that before I took a view, I would want to know what they've got to say about that.
Yes, absolutely.
That when he was leader, Jeremy Corbyn and John MacDonald, as the Shadow Chancellor, took quite radical views. And Jeremy said, and John said, because I was with them, it's up to what people in Scotland want, because that's democratic. I mean, okay, maybe not going to do what you want them to do, but that's democracy.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting perspective, and given that you know him, you've had dealings with them, it's probably more informed than the kind of thing we're reading in the papers at the moment. But I kind of feel that way as well. That I'm really, as a way back former Labour voter, not member, and former trade union rep, I don't recognise the Labour Party anymore. It's just so far away from when I was involved in those things. And I imagine there's a lot of people in Scotland who, having voted Labour to get rid of the Tories, are appalled at what their MPs are doing in their names. I mean, mine's an awful little, I can't even say the word on. So far, he's voted to dismantle the welfare state and pile on the nuclear weapons. I'm just disgusted.
The single most disgusting thing, and sometimes you're scared to switch on the news, is what's been happening in Gaza.
Yes.
Absolutely, totally appalling that we are still supplying weapons to Israel. It really is there. What's happened there is unspeakable. And our silence, and of course, Britain has more responsibility than other nations, because our mandate from the League of Nations was to look after the interests of the Palestinian people. And what did we do? We did the Balfour Declaration, which sold out to the Zionists.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. We were on the demo in Edinburgh, was it 2 weekends ago? And the idea that you're potentially people are being arrested simply for supporting people in Palestine's right not to be butchered. It's disgusting that's actually being, that our police even are complying with that.
Well, I mean, it's just, I heard the thing about, Yvette Cooper saying, prescribe, Palestine action, because someone's gone and sprayed a bit of paint on a plane. I mean, there's a thing about, Palestine itself, and I mean, it just it all feels so hopeless, really, about, being able to pull it back. Well, I was going to say pull it back from the brink, but actually it's gone over the brink. That's gone, I think. But for a Labour Home Secretary to do that,
they're just not Labour, though, are they?
You've got the nail on the head. I mean, these people are captured by the establishment, and you've got to remember, the establishment looks after these people. They know that, looking at what things there, they might be out, but you've got to remember that there are all these jobs when they lose power. There are all these positions, what they get. And people often forget there that jobs like Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary, Chancellor, Home Secretary, are what's known as the great offices of state. If you lose your job, you still get half your wages. You end up, getting half salary for the rest of your life. And that's all part of how the establishment captures people.
Even the whole nuclear drive, obviously the nuclear industry is pushing them to build not just power stations, but also arm up, increase the spending. And I heard an interesting thing just the other day about this requirement that 5% of your national income or whatever spending is on defence. What Italy have done is they've gone, okay, it would help our defence if we had much better infrastructure, maybe some new bridges, these kind of things. So that, that is what I recognise as defence, and perhaps a healthier, more educated population, and gave them better wages if they do choose to serve. It's defending your country by making it resilient and making it work. His idea that, that just means we buy more nukes from a madman on the other side of the world it's just beyond me.
And we should remember there, I mean, the munitions industry in the United States, you know, is colossal. I mean, because, and you've also got to think, you know, the amount of money that the states are spending on defence. But see, when they're giving all these planes and weapons to Israel and Ukraine and all that, and they're saying it's costing, you know, all these billions, you've got to remember that these billions are being spent in the United States.
Yes.
In that industry. And then when they're telling Ukraine, well, you have to pay the money back. And, you know, he's just done these deals with Ukraine to get Ukraine, you know, the vital minerals, these precious metals they have and all that. So, and this is to maintain the war machine in the United States. So there are all these ulterior motives involved as well. It's really quite... and Eisenhower warned about... He was the head of the army at one time and then president. He warned about, you know, the power of the munitions industry.
Yeah.
Oh, the military complex. Was that it? Military industrial complex.
Yeah.
Yes, we've had an interesting conversation with Isabel Lindsay about that one as well.
Yeah, we did.
Do you think that Starmer is going to last the rest of his term? Do you think there might be some kind of coup or change of direction?
My view is no, because what you've got to understand is the nature of these these are professional politicians. They're not people that are there out of principle or a moral compass. It's all about power. And he understands that he's got a massive majority, as I've said. He's got 2/3 of the MPs on a third of the vote, which shows how first past the post, you know, isn't democratic. But he's got that, and they're going to just work it out. Well, okay, we've got 4 years still to go, and we'll go over all the bad things, and then in the last year, we'll give them some sugar, some sweeties to try and do it. And that's how they'll work.
That's how they do it.
I mean, you've got to remember that if, in fact, they lose out, all these people aren't going to be going on the dole.
That's true.
They're all going to be getting looked after in different ways and all that.
Yeah.
So my experience is that people very rarely give up power. And there's no doubt in my mind, from, again, dealing with people I've knew for years, that power does corrupt. And it made you there how people that you knew once have been in a position for 3 or 4 years, they actually lose touch with reality, and they start actually believing that they're a different race from other people.
Looking forward to Holyrood 2026, what do you think's the outcome going to be there? Do you think Labour have blown their chance of getting a First Minister?
Well, I would say what I said earlier there was that Starmer is not interested in Scotland or Wales or anything. He's interested in that big picture of the UK, and he's working out it's another 4 years to the general election. So all these decisions about two-child cap, about disability benefits, that's going to go there, and that's going to affect Labour. But I think it's going to be very interesting what happens, because I think that the SNP they've got up and go, has went up and left. And I think this announcement, this morning, about Kate Forbes, about, okay there, but do people not see some kind of a future there? As I say, at this stage in time, I don't see a passion about next year's. People need to have a passion, and as the SNP, I don't think, Starmer's Labour's going to do that, but is the SNP what are they going to offer people next year's election? And I don't think they've been mad or up. I mean, I was always disappointed. I thought one of the significant things about SNP was the fact that they didn't support NATO. And I think that's one of that was a defining decision of SNP deciding to become an establishment party. when they decided that they would, join NATO. In my view, I mean, the Ukraine war is all about NATO. The nearest we've been to a nuclear war in my lifetime was when the Russians were going to put rocket bases in Cuba. 50 miles from the American. So, I mean, America wouldn't allow that. So why should Russia allow Ukraine, on its borders? And everybody knew there that the balance when the breakdown of the Soviet Union was, that the agreement was that they wouldn't encroach on these areas, and they did. And as I said, the United States wouldn't accept bases next door to them. And Russia hasn't either. I'm not an advocate for Russia and all that, but that is the reality of them.
I saw a map of Europe, NATO in Europe. So the map was probably from about 20 years back, and you compare that with the current map, and immediately it's like the borders of NATO, as it were, have just moved eastwards. And I mean, you think, well, if I was in Russia, I wouldn't. That doesn't make you feel safe. That makes you feel, as you're saying, like you've been encroached on. And even with Putin there and with all the power that he's managed to accrue to himself for all this time, I mean, there's another. Well, I was going to say there's another one who's slick it, but Putin's a lot worse than just being slick it. He's psychotic. But actually, from just an ordinary Russian's point of view, you can go, well, it doesn't look very good. It doesn't look like they've kept they've kept what they said they were going to do. So, I mean, I agree with you. I think there's things that the SNP, after all, they have had a long time in power, and there are things that they could have done, quite radical shifts that they could have done, even with the current devolution settlement. There could have been a lot more, sending power down to local authorities, and that hasn't happened. I know they've made a start at land reform, but it's a bit of a weak start, and no one's very happy with it. And well, maybe the land estates are, but no one else is. And it just seems like the kind of guts and energy that was there has dissipated. And I mean, you go, well, God, it's a hard task to run a country, and they've only got. I mean, there's only 129 people in the parliament. I mean, and half of them are running the country. So it's a big ask, but it does seem like, something's kind of been frittered away. But anyway, of course, if the worst happens again, like next year in Holyrood, and you end up with the possibility of a unionist alliance again, I mean, fingers crossed that doesn't happen. But then that's even worse, isn't it? Because then it'll not just be things frittering away; it'll be wholesale. I think it would be wholesale dismantling. Yeah, especially if as it seems likely, Reform UK end up having some MSPs. That gets me to a question that I was wondering if you'd talk a bit about, because I mean, I guess it's hard to know exactly, but you hear the figures bandied about that within the Labour Party members, right, or maybe it's Labour voters, a quarter to a third support independence. So now I know there was Labour for Independence group during the referendum campaign, and I know you were part of that. But what do you think about that now? I mean, do you think there's space for something like that again? Maybe even for next year. I don't mean people putting people up for election, probably not able to do that now, but, a kind of from within the left wing in Scotland, and not SNP people, but coming out and saying, look, maybe this is the time that, if we don't get it in this election, we're going to slip way, way back. What do you think?
There has been some attempts, but a lot of the people who I was involved with in Labour for Independence have in fact left the Labour Party. That's one of the things there.
Right.
And there was an attempt about 3 years ago, people, and I remember it was Labour activists, and there was maybe 150 names in it, who I recognised a lot of them, was there about trying to get something off the ground. But again, that's just died a death. So it's not there. Now, as I said, this new party with Jeremy Corbyn, it's not said anything about devolution until it does. I don't know what's going to happen. My own view here is that we are going to get more. If you ask me for prediction, I would say that the way things are going at Holyrood next year, I think we'll get maybe more of a rainbow parliament, because I think we'll see more of the smaller parties. I think, things will happen. And, under, our system, the additional member system, which is not a perfect PR system, and the way it works there. For example, you mentioned reform, but is reform going to take more votes from the Tories than from Labour and the SNP? Quite honestly,
you'd like to think so, wouldn't you?
You think so, but not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
If this Jeremy Corbyn new party gets off the ground and is saying something about devolution, again, you could see something happening there. So I think it's going to be a very interesting election, and I think if you're going to see reform and this possible new Corbyn party coming in, then I think that could well force both the SNP and Labour to actually, if you like, up their ante, up what they're going to be saying, because I think they've got to give some message to the electorate why you should vote for them. It might well be that acts as a stimulus for them to come away with some new ideas, because I think people think, I would think right now you're seeing that Scottish politics is in a rut.
And there's so many issues that I think the people are more radical than any of the politicians, and things like energy prices, for example, and land reform you mentioned. There's so many big ticket items that actually people are going, do more, do it quicker, do it now. And none of them are stepping up to it. But as you say, I'm sure it's going to be very, very interesting. So thank you very much for chatting with us for the last hour. It's been fascinating to hear your perspective.
And thank you, because it's always preparing and during this interview, it makes you rethink, doesn't it? You go back and you're searching things, so it'll give you a lot of food for thought as well. And to your listeners there, 25 years of Scottish Left Review, please go in and have a look at the website.
We'll put the link to the website on the notes for this podcast so everybody can click onto it and have a look. We'd encourage you to do that.
Great.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening on YouTube, you can click the little bell and you get a reminder whenever we put out a new episode, which is every Friday.
And sign up for our mailing list. You can do that from the website. And we always send one out at the beginning of each month to tell you what's happening. Last but not least, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com.
And we'll catch you later. Bye now.